I can honestly say I don't think you find a more controversial topic rooted in who God is and who God wants us to be than what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks together. It's one of the most Googled terms. It's a subject that is searched for in libraries across the country. It's one that if we can actually find some roots to put to it, I believe it has the ability to change the way that you live your everyday life. When we look at the Bible, specifically in the New Testament, it causes issue after issue. It causes people to turn on one another. It causes secret conversations and dark corners. This one word upended the norm for religious practice in Jerusalem. This one word has changed the world. This one word is not so much universal as it is individualistic, where it applies to all of humanity in thought and in theory. But at its core, the only reason in thought and in theory it applies to all of us is because it can apply to just you. You as a person. As a husband or wife, as a child, aunt or uncle, as a business owner or a contract laborer, a teacher. Whether you've been a follower of Jesus all of your life, or whether you're still not sure whether Jesus is worth following or not. When God uses this word, when it comes out of the mouth of Jesus, it creates controversy. I want to read you a little bit of a story this morning. And hopefully we discover together why this word is so powerful and why it has the potential that if our church truly grasps it, it could alter the way we do ministry in our community, the way you interact with your family this holiday season. Yeah, y'all are good about the community thing, but you're like, no. Uncle Jim's coming. I already know what I'm going to say to him. I've been working on that for a year. We all got one of them uncles. I hear you. We're going to be reading out of the book of Luke. Luke, by trade, was a doctor. Luke, a very educated man. And Luke specifically, in the first part of his book, in chapter 1, verse 3, he actually gives the reason for why he wrote what he writes in the book of Luke. He says, here's the deal. Many people have given an attempt to write down an account of what's happened in the life of Jesus. And so he says, I thought I would give a stab at it. He's an educated guy, he's a doctor, so logic and reason and cause and effect are certainly something that he lives out in his own life. And so he makes that decision. He says, you know what? I'm going to do some investigating on my own. I'm going to interview eyewitnesses, and I'm going to make this orderly account for the world to read. Actually, I'm not sure he thought the world would read it at the time. But this guy that he addresses it to, or this group of people, who knows, he thought it was important. And so Luke begins to write this book, and we find ourselves in chapter 7. I'll begin reading in verse 36. It says this: when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. I find that interesting, so we want to break that down just a little bit. There's a Pharisee. The Pharisee was kind of the religious leaders of the time, and so they invite Jesus, a rabbi, a teacher, maybe a prophet to some. This particular guy invites Jesus, hey, why don't you come and have dinner with me? In fact, we're going to throw this party. There's going to be lots of people there. Why don't you come over and have dinner? And so Jesus says, sure, I'm going to go have dinner. I'm going to recline at your table. So if you can picture the dinner table at your house and then just throw that out the window. Don't literally throw it out the window, but just get rid of that picture. And so what we want to picture is like this little table kind of close to the ground, and you would lean in on your left elbow. I would get down, but I'm afraid I won't be able to get back up. And then I have to finish from the floor. So you would lean on your elbow, and your head would be at the table, and your feet would be way back here, and you would all kind of recline and lounge together and kind of just chill and eat. And you'd hang out, and you'd tell stories, and you would just kind of fellowship with one another. And so that's what's happening here. You can imagine Jesus lying on the floor, on his elbow, just maybe eating some cheese and crackers. I don't know. I find it also interesting that we have a description of the audience that Jesus is going to have dinner with. If you go back just a couple of chapters into chapter 5, it actually says Jesus had dinner with somebody else, a guy named Levi. For those of you who have studied the Bible a little bit, he might be a little familiar to you. We're not going to get into him, but he was a tax collector. He becomes fairly important to Jesus. Tax collectors in a day were some of the most ruthless people in culture. They were stealing from their own people. Rome would say, hey, this is the taxes I need you to collect. But anything they took on top of what Rome said they had to have, they could keep for themselves. So Jesus is hanging out with this tax collector. In fact, he specifically kind of gets railed by the religious community, like, why are you hanging out with these people? These kinds of people. Why are you doing that? We fast forward 2 chapters, and now Jesus is having dinner with this religious person. I just want to draw attention and ask the question, does your dinner table look the same from week to week? Are the house guests that you allow to come into your dwelling, are some of them great church people, and some of them people that probably have never gone to a church? Maybe they think that if they ever walked into a church, the whole building would set on fire. Do you allow those people at your table? Here, Luke makes sure that we understand that Jesus' dinner guests, or the places he enjoyed eating dinner, it was a variety of types of company. There Jesus is, reclining at the table. Verse 37, it says, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. And so Jesus is reclining, he's doing his cheese and cracker thing, and there's this lady standing there that everyone in the room knows she has a reputation. The Bible actually specifically just says she's a sinner. But typically in this culture, if you have a woman who is well known for her sin, she typically probably falls into some sexual overt sin, most likely prostitution. Even if that wasn't it, either way, she has a reputation in the community for being no good, unwholesome, a sinner. Not a sinner like, oh, she screws up every once in a while, but a sinner like, hey, this is what defines who she is. This is her. And so she comes to the Pharisee's house. I don't know how she gets in. Maybe she had been there before. She slips in the back maybe, I don't know. But she's standing there along the wall. And she has this jar of perfume, this alabaster jar. And Jesus is laying there in front of her, and she begins to weep. Have you ever watched someone weep? Not like get teary-eyed, not get emotional, But have you ever watched someone weep? To give you an idea of the volume of this weepiness, it says that her tears are falling from her face onto the feet of Jesus. That's a lot of weeping. Now, no one's saying anything. No one's saying, hey, you need a tissue? No one's saying that. Like it's just happening. This lady is just standing on the wall, holding her alabaster jar of perfume and weeping all over Jesus' feet. I have a little trouble not asking the question, well, why are you crying? Immediately, I think about Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own. There's no crying in baseball. There's no crying at dinner parties. I tell you why she's crying. Because she's guilty. But you want me to tell you why she's weeping? You see, before I get there, if you just feel guilty, there's other ways to express your guiltiness. Most of the time, if you want to express your guiltiness, you're feeling guilty, you just stay home and cry. Right? Like you lock the door and you turn your phone off and you just cry with the ice cream bucket. That's what you do. Or maybe you go to a bar and cry. Right? Maybe you're like, I need just a little bit, just something to kind of give me some relief. And you find yourself at a bar and you're sitting there crying and you're hoping that you find a bar buddy and they make you feel better. Or maybe you go to your best friend's house and cry. Or maybe you call them on the phone and you cry to them. You certainly don't go to a stranger's house. Stand up against the wall and start crying so much that your tears are falling on the guest of honor's feet. You don't do that because you're guilty. No, she's moved to weeping. Not only because she's guilty, but because she knows Jesus is not. She knows who she's crying behind. She knows whose feet her tears are falling on. She knows that the connection to him is greater than any embarrassment that she might experience. Her being classified as a sinner in the community, having this reputation, there was the chance that when she walked in, even if she had a previous relationship with this Pharisee, probably even more dangerous, that he wouldn't turn around and say, hey, get out of here, you sinner. Or maybe he's even a little more stern. He says, do you know who is here with me tonight? This rabbi, this teacher? Don't come in my house making a mess of yourself. But she knew who Jesus was. Verse 39, it says this. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he's talking about Jesus. If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. You notice that it says he said it to himself? Like he's there talking to himself. He's like, you know what, maybe this guy isn't as special as I thought he was. These thoughts are going through his mind. Because surely he would know, and he wouldn't let this prostitute, I have another word, but there's some young folks in here, this other person, touch all over his feet. Let her hair down and start wiping up his feet. Certainly, if this man were everything I thought maybe he would be, he would know whose lips are touching his feet. He's probably thinking, do you know where those lips have been? And yet you let them all over you. He says it to himself. I love that verse 40 said, Jesus answered him. He was thinking to himself, And then Jesus said, I have something to say about what you just said in your brain. He said, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he says. Tell me, teacher. He says, 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? A denarii is a day's wage. So you work for an entire day as a laborer. Someone picks you up and says, hey, you want to come work for me for a day? What they would pay you would be a denarii. And so you got one guy who's got 50 days worth of labor, and that's the debt that he's got. So a little over a month and a half, right? And then you got the other guy that's got 500 denarii, right? That's a bunch. That's like a year and a third plus. That's a lot of debt. And he says, and the guy that owes the money, he says, you know what? That's it. I'm just going to cancel both of the debts. Which one do you think will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. You notice how a Pharisee is incredibly legalistic when it comes to what happens in terms of religion? Typically, a Pharisee could be characterized as someone who always has the answer. And rightfully so. Their education was to a level where they could just recall from memory. The entire first part of the first 5 books that we know of the Old Testament would be committed to memory. The law of Moses, every piece of it, they had memorized. And so if you wanted to have a conversation or a debate with them, likely you were going to lose. Notice when Jesus asks the question, he says, well, I suppose. You suppose something? I think it's interesting that when people are incredibly religious and it comes to Jesus, it goes from, I know this for a fact, to, well, maybe I could be wrong about this. I suppose. Well, Jesus assures him, you've judged correctly, Jesus said. Verse 44, let's dive in real quick. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Notice that he gives Simon a softball. He's like, hey, here you go, hit this one, get the right answer. And he's like, oh, well, I've solved the rabbi's riddle. Well, of course, right? Well, I suppose the one who owed the bigger debt. And Jesus is like, oh, you're absolutely right. Now let me tell you why I asked you the question. You notice how he starts? He says, I came into your house. He said, I just want you to know that what follows is your responsibility. This house belongs to you. What happens in it is yours. I came into your house, he says. And then he gives 3 distinct differences between the way that Simon did not act, but that the woman did act. So it's customary when you walk into a first century home that there'd be someone, an attendant there, waiting to wash your feet. Jesus didn't get this treatment, which is strange because for a Pharisee, they actually had money. This would have been a normal thing happening. Whether it was oversight, we don't know, or whether it was just being rude, or maybe he was trying to catch Jesus in one of the ways that the religious elite would attempt to catch Jesus from time to time. I don't know. We don't get that information. All we know is that it's typical. And this time, Jesus didn't get it. And so he says, I walked into your house, a place where you are responsible. Nothing happened to my feet. But this lady, the one you says don't belong here, she was doing your job. So the tears, instead of washing, says, you did not give me a kiss. But this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. It was customary when friends would meet each other, when you would invite someone in your home. It was that moment in the door where, you open the door and you're like, oh man, it's so great to see you. And you exchange hugs or bro hugs, and like someone's carrying food and it's like, oh, let me get that for you. All of those things, that's typical where this kiss would happen. There was none of that. Yet she repeatedly takes her lips and puts it on the feet, the unwashed feet of Jesus. You did not put oil on my head, but she took this alabaster jar of perfume and poured it out on his feet. There's quite the contrast. Verse 47. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. I want to read that one more time. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. I think the first thing we've got to take away today is that our forgiveness is displayed in how well we love God. Take inventory just for a moment. For those of you who have followed Jesus for a long time, at some point, I think we just walk in this grace because we know that we're assured of this grace in this relationship we have with Jesus. And it gives us confidence to live our lives and to raise our kids and be great partners in the community. And so we walk in this grace. We walk in this love of Jesus. And sometimes it eludes us that the whole reason we have this relationship is because we were offered forgiveness. That we have this connection because we had been forgiven. Do we make that connection as we go about our lives day in and day out? Kind of recognizing that the way that we love God shows other people just how much we value our forgiveness? Now that's a difficult thing for us to do as followers of Jesus, for those of you who are. Because it means that over and over again we have to admit out loud that we couldn't do it on our own. That we were one of the people in the story. Maybe we owed 50, maybe we owed 500. Either way, we couldn't pay the bill. And because we can't pay the bill, we require someone else to forgive it. And sometimes that can be humiliating. I'd say that's what Satan wants you to believe, that it's humiliating. I think God just wants it to be humbling. He just wants you to remember that all you have is His. That every breath you breathe belongs to Him. It originated with Him. It returns to Him. Or maybe you're not forgiven. Maybe you don't have a relationship with Jesus. I find that it's typically one of two things when it comes to this. It's either you believe that He can't forgive you or that He won't forgive you. It's typically one of those two things. He can't or He won't. He doesn't have the capacity to, or He just look at you and say, no, I'm not interested in having a relationship with a wretch like you, right? I think that's why this word is so controversial. Because in our mind and the way that our world works, we see people as people that owe 50 or 500. And it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around us being equal. It's difficult for us to kind of walk through our life knowing that the sinner woman, the one against the wall who's weeping out loud, that everyone in the room knows what her issue is and what her pain comes from, all of those things, all those nasty things she's a part of, and me, we're in the same boat. We need the same thing from the debt collector. We need him to forgive. And the moment that happens, we're equal. Now we want to remember. We want to remember that past piece and say, well, yeah, we're equal in terms of what God has done. I still don't want you around my kids, though. I'd rather you not come to our church, though. In fact, I'm going to unfriend you on Facebook. I'll follow you on my burner account so I can still creep on your account, though. Y'all know that's real. I don't know how to tell you that what we see here is true. But God has been trying to tell you for quite some time. Since the beginning of the world and the moment that we broke ties with God as a picture of humanity, as a people that said, no, there's something better than what God has given us. There must be something beyond perfection that we can take in and drink in to have and call our own. From that moment on, God has been orchestrating and moving throughout the lives and the hands of men, sovereignly kind of adjusting and making way for Jesus. He starts in the beginning by creating a nation. He gives this man Abraham this promise, this covenant that says, hey, there's a way back to me, and it begins with you, from you. The entire world and every single person that's ever lived will be blessed. He says, that's how much I love you, because I'll forgive you. And when that kind of happened and began to kind of give fruit, and he said, you know what, let's go to the next step. Let me tell you how much I want to forgive you. I'm going to give you a law so that you can measure yourself up against what I know to be right and what you fail to understand to be right is. So I'll give you this law. And then after the law, he said, you know what, you need a little more help, some insight. I'm going to give you judges, and I'm going to give you great judges and heroic judges and judges that slaughter people that are your enemies and protect you. Judges that come alongside you and usher you as a nation closer and closer to me. And when you're fed up with that, I'm going to give you a king, and he's going to be an incredible king. I'm going to follow him with a better king, and I'm going to follow him with a better king. I'm going to create this temple where I'll come and live, and my presence will live there, and we'll call it the Holy of Holies. And one day a year, I'll meet with the one that's anointed that comes in, and I'll make sure that everything is forgiven. And when that wasn't enough, which he knew it wouldn't be enough, the Holy Spirit gets us to Jesus, and Jesus says, watch this. I'm going to give you every single good year of my life, and I'm going to live spotless and blameless and perfect on your behalf. And then when it's all done, I'm not going to tie it up with a nice little bow. No, I'm going to tie myself to a cross. God allowed Jesus to hang there until he was dead, knowing he could do something about it like that. Then he allowed other people to take his son's body off of the cross. And he watched other people take his son's body and put it into the ground. And then he watched a regiment of Roman soldiers put a stone in front of it and said, he's not getting out of here. And then 3 days later, the resurrection erupted. And forgive came walking out. But that wasn't enough. So Jesus left and sent his Spirit here. And that wasn't enough. So he gave you the church. And he said, this is how much I love the church. I'm coming back for her. I will call her my bride. And I'm going to go and make a place that's suitable for her. And then I'm coming back for her. The gates of hell will not be able to overcome that 7-letter word. Forgive. God will forgive you. God will forgive you. God will forgive you. I feel like we should say it a few more times because I believe there are people in the room that when I say it, you say, no, it won't. God will forgive you. God will forgive you. Are you the adulterer standing on the wall? God will forgive you. Are you the person that wrecked your kid's childhood? God will forgive you. Are you the addict that can't get right? God will forgive you. You're a rapist? God will forgive you. Have you caused harm to everyone that ever got close to you? God will forgive you. Now you're seeing why it's so controversial. Because we come to a place when you say, I don't know, when you start saying things like that, I still see that I'm the 50, they're the 500. Yeah. I tell you, a lot of times I feel like the 500. But so thankful that God will forgive. And that might not sit well with other people that you've hurt or harmed or maybe even ruined their lives. But I'll tell you this, if God can forgive you, He'll teach them how to forgive you as well. I believe this wholeheartedly, and I want you to listen close. Being forgiven isn't a journey. It's a decision. Do you want to be forgiven? If so, decide. Decide today.